Okay, so welcome back to the deep dive. And today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a diet program.
Right.
That focuses on something I think that a lot of our listeners are interested in, which is rapid, healthy, lean muscle gain.
Mm-hmm.
And the really interesting thing about the source material that we're going to be diving into today,
Right.
Which was shared by a listener,
Yeah.
is this fast gain diet document.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just like someone giving advice.
Yeah.
This is actually a diet that the author used
Exactly.
for 6 months and reported, some pretty significant muscle gain. I think it was something like
he said
3/4 of a stone.
about 3/4 of a stone. Yeah, with very low body fat.
Yeah, which is about 10.5 pounds.
Yeah.
So
It's pretty good.
it's something that I think we can all learn from, whether we're trying to build muscle or just want to understand the principles behind this kind of diet. So our goal today is really to take apart this diet, understand the key components, the kind of like reasoning behind the recommendations, and then pull out some actionable insights that our listeners can actually, use and apply.
Exactly. Yeah, and kind of see what they can take away from it for their own, fitness journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that jumps out right away about the fast gain diet, at least for me, is this huge emphasis on protein.
Yes, absolutely.
They really position this idea of a high protein intake as being like absolutely essential for rapid and healthy lean muscle gain.
Yeah, and they even recommend, a specific minimum amount that you should be aiming for.
Yeah, so they recommend at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
And
well, what's interesting, too, is they also suggest that, for some individuals, even going up to 2 grams per pound could be beneficial.
That's right. Yeah, they say some people might actually see better results with even more.
Yeah. Yeah, and they encourage you to kind of experiment and see what works best for you.
Right, that's right. It's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. But what I think is really helpful is that, they don't just give you this number and say, good luck. They actually give you some very specific food sources that you can use to actually hit these protein goals.
Exactly. Yeah. They actually give you like a whole plan for like what to eat and when.
Yeah. Like scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
And they even get into the weeds a little bit.
They do.
They talk about the ratio of whole eggs to egg whites, depending on your...
Based on your age, your weight, your activity level.
Yeah, your age, your weight, if you're over 40.
Yeah. And they even give you a note about like cholesterol if you're over 40.
Cholesterol, yeah. Then you've got your protein shakes, obviously, whey protein, skim milk, fruit.
Yeah, pretty standard.
And then they've got, just all the classic protein sources: tuna, steak, fish, chicken, beef, pork, even high protein beans. So they really give you a pretty comprehensive list to work with.
They do. Yeah, there are a lot of options there.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting about this protein focus is how they structure the meals around these sources.
That's right. Yeah, it's not just about hitting a daily total.
Yeah.
It's about like actually incorporating protein into each meal and snack.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about protein, obviously very important. But what about the other macronutrients?
Yeah.
Carbohydrates and fats.
Right. Well, the diet does talk about adjusting those as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do they approach that?
So with carbohydrate intake, it seems to be quite flexible and really tailored to like your body fat goals.
Okay.
If you're aiming for a super lean physique, you might want to go lower carb.
Okay.
But they still emphasize the importance of having enough carbs to fuel your workouts and to support muscle protein synthesis.
Okay. So it's not about cutting them out entirely.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
They actually recommend good sources like oatmeal and brown rice with portion sizes adjusted based on your weight.
Okay.
But they do say to limit or even eliminate refined carbs and most starches.
That makes sense, for managing your overall calorie intake.
Yeah.
And kind of avoiding those less nutrient-dense sources.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's about making sure you're getting the most bang for your buck, so to speak.
Right. Okay, now what about fat? Dietary fat.
So the fast gain diet recommends about 25 to 30% of your daily calories from fat.
Okay.
With an emphasis on EFAs essential fatty acids, and unsaturated fats.
Got it.
So it's about incorporating those healthy fats.
Yeah. And they also talk about being mindful of empty calories, right?
That's right.
You know, things like salad dressings, sauces, gravies.
Yeah, those sneaky little things that can really add up.
Yeah. You know, you might not even think about it.
Yeah.
But they can really sabotage your progress.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about protein, carbs, and fat. But one thing that I noticed in the fast gain diet is that they also get into the specifics of meal structure and meal frequency.
That's right. Yeah, they give a pretty detailed daily meal plan.
Yeah.
With breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks throughout the day.
And a lot of those snacks are protein shakes, right?
A lot of them are protein shakes, yeah.
Yeah. So how many meals are they recommending per day?
They recommend eating 5 to 8 smaller meals each day.
5 to 8. Okay. And what's the reasoning behind that?
The reasoning is to leverage the thermic effect of food.
Okay. Explain that a little bit.
So basically, it's the energy your body uses to digest, absorb, and process the nutrients you eat.
Okay.
By eating more often, the idea is that you keep your metabolism more active throughout the day.
So it's like keeping your body constantly working to process the food.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's a pretty cool concept.
Now, two things that I think often get overlooked in these kinds of diets are hydration and fiber. And the fast gain diet actually addresses those.
They do, yeah. They emphasize both quite a bit.
So what do they say about hydration?
They're pretty specific about water intake. They say to aim for 1 ounce of water per kilogram of body weight.
Got it.
And then gradually increase that up to about half a gallon per day.
So that's a lot of water.
It is.
But important.
Yeah.
Now, what about fiber?
For fiber, they recommend a minimum of 30 grams per day.
Oh, yeah.
And they specifically say to include fibrous vegetables in at least 2 of your meals.
And fiber is important not just for, digestion and gut health, but also for helping you feel full.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that can be really helpful when you're on a more structured eating plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. But I think there's one more thing that we need to talk about, which is supplementation.
Right, because no muscle-building diet would be complete without addressing supplements.
Exactly. So what does the fast gain diet have to say about that?
So the author actually recommends a multivitamin.
And also supplements containing iron and magnesium.
Okay.
And they say this is to help support muscle function and growth.
Makes sense. And it's interesting that they don't recommend a whole bunch of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Like you see in some other diets.
Right. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, just the basics.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously diet is important. Yeah. But there are also some lifestyle factors that can come into play.
That's right.
That can affect your progress.
Yeah.
And the fast gain diet actually talks about 2 of these specifically, alcohol and stimulants.
Yeah.
So what's their stance on alcohol?
They're pretty clear about alcohol. They basically say to avoid it.
Okay.
Because it can contribute to body fat.
Yeah.
And potentially even suppress testosterone levels.
Right.
Which is not going to help with muscle gain.
Exactly. And what about stimulants? Things like caffeine, ephedrine.
So they do mention those, but with a warning?
To use them sparingly.
Okay.
And to cycle their use.
Okay.
To avoid dependence.
So don't rely on them too much.
Right.
Okay. Now, obviously, one of the big questions that people have with any kind of diet is, what kind of results can you actually expect to see?
Exactly.
And does the fast gain diet address that?
They do, yeah.
Okay. So what do they say?
So they say that you could start to see some visible changes within a few months.
Okay.
But that it really depends on being consistent with the diet.
Okay.
And also having a proper training program.
So it's not just about the food.
Right. It's about the whole package.
Yeah. You got to put in the work.
Yeah.
And they really, really emphasize this idea of consistency, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They say that if you want to see the results, you have to stick to the plan.
You can't cheat.
You can't cheat. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've covered pretty much everything here. Let's just kind of summarize the core principles of this fast gain diet.
Okay.
So it's basically a very high protein intake, strategic approach to carbs and fats, tailored to your goals, eating frequently, smaller meals, prioritizing hydration and fiber, And then considering those basic supplements.
Yeah.
Multivitamin, iron, magnesium.
Exactly.
And running through all of this is that crucial element of consistency.
Absolutely. Consistency is key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the fast gain diet in a nutshell. But for our listeners out there, as you're thinking about this information, I think it's worth doing a little bit more research on some of these topics. For example, this idea of protein timing, how distributing your protein intake throughout the day might actually influence muscle protein synthesis.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of research out there on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area to dig into. Also, this idea of adjusting your carbs based on whether you're bulking or cutting.
Yeah, that's another big one.
There's a lot of different approaches to that. And then, finally, this emphasis on EFAs and unsaturated fats. I think it's really worth understanding the specific roles that those different types of fats play in your overall health and muscle growth.
Exactly. Yeah, because not all fats are created equal.
So today we've given you a very detailed snapshot of this fast gain diet.
Yeah.
One specific strategy for achieving rapid muscle gain. But I think the real takeaway here is that finding the optimal nutrition plan for you is often going to involve some experimentation.
Right.
You got to see what works for your body. And it's really about understanding these fundamental principles and then adapting them to your individual needs and your long-term goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about finding what works for you and what you can stick to in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Sustainability is key.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind as you continue on your fitness journey. And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.
All right.
Bye.